Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Today we take a look at a team of hard men from back in the day, who were the go-to guys if you needed a problem sorted. No questions asked. Two of them had fearsome reputations, and the third was the Guv'nor, Lenny McLean. Stay tuned as we look at just one incident that helped cement their reputation. The atmosphere in the pub was thick with tension, the air practically humming with a mix of booze, aggression, and testosterone. A group of travellers were clustered around the pool table, their voices loud, their movements rough as they laughed and tossed money on the game. They were clearly at ease, dominating the space as if they owned it. But that ease quickly evaporated when a thick-set man strolled casually into the pub. He walked in like he owned the place, showing no sign of fear or hesitation as he ordered a beer. He wasn't one of the regulars, and it didn't take long for the travellers to notice him. The man nonchalantly pushed his way past them, ignoring their annoyed looks, and placed a single coin on the pool table, amidst the thick wads of cash already staked on the game. The travellers eyed him with suspicion. "Do we know you, boy?" one of them asked, a wiry fellow who didn't appreciate the newcomer's boldness. Another man, fearsome in appearance with a shaggy beard and a face full of scars, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Answer the man, you bollocks," he snarled, getting right up in the stranger's face. The thick-set man didn't flinch. He simply smiled, his strong jawline tightening slightly as he replied, "Just fancy a game of pool." His voice was calm, almost too calm for the situation. He turned, grabbed a pool cue from the rack, and swung it with brutal precision. The thick end of the cue smashed into the scar-faced man's head with a sickening thud. Blood spurted everywhere, and the cue snapped in two, the broken half spiraling across the room. The scarred man crumpled to the floor, unconscious, as the chaos erupted around him. The rest of the travellers sprang into action, a violent frenzy of fists, boots, and broken bottles flying through the air as they attacked the lone man. But this wasn't just any man. They'd made a fatal mistake in thinking he was alone, or that he was an easy target. The man wasn't some crazed Lone Ranger. He was a top-tier doorman from London, well known in the city's toughest circles. His name was John, but most people called him the Neck. He had a reputation, and as backup, a formidable man named Alan Crossley was supposed to be with him. Unfortunately, Crossley was still outside, finishing a cigarette while John was inside, fighting for his life. John wasn't just a doorman, he was a seasoned fighter who had worked with the best in the business. His friend and mentor, Lenny McLean, was a legend in the world of bouncers, a man feared and respected in equal measure. Alongside Crossley, another giant of a man, they had formed an unstoppable team. They were the go-to guys when things got rough, when pubs were overrun by troublemakers, or needed a firm hand to sort things out. John had learned from the best, but tonight he was on his own, hoping Crossley would join the fray before things got worse. The plan had been simple. John would stroll in first, catching the travellers off guard and starting the fight. Lenny McLean would follow shortly after, crashing into the room like a battering ram, cleaning up whatever mess was left. But Lenny was late, and John found himself alone in the eye of the storm, fighting off the gang of travellers who seemed hell-bent on taking him down. As punches and kicks rained down on him, John fought back with everything he had. He managed to keep them at bay, but the odds weren't in his favour. The travellers were tough, and there were too many of them. Just as he was beginning to think he might not make it out in one piece, he heard a roar. It was the sound of the cavalry arriving. Lenny McLean burst into the pub like a man possessed, his massive frame crashing into the travellers like a wrecking ball. Bodies flew in every direction as Lenny tore through the gang, his fists landing with bone-crunching force. One traveller dived headfirst over the pool table in a desperate attempt to escape, while another was sent flying into a slot machine with a loud crash. John could only grin as he watched the carnage unfold. This lot's getting a proper spanking, John thought, still holding one of the travellers in a chokehold. But the man was dirty, ramming his thumb into John's eye in a last-ditch effort to break free. Pain exploded in John's head as the traveller tried to gouge his eye out. Reacting on instinct, John reached up and grabbed 2 darts from the dartboard nearby, driving them into the man's skull. The traveller yelped in pain and collapsed to the floor, one of the darts still embedded in his head. By the time Lenny had finished, most of the gang had either fled or were lying in a bloody heap on the floor. John dragged the remaining few out of the pub, kicking and stomping on them for good measure to ensure they didn't get back up. When the dust settled, the pub was a wreck, with bloodstains on the floor and broken furniture everywhere. Lenny, ever the jokester, turned to John with a grin. "Fancy a nice lemonade, me son?" he asked, laughing in that psychotic way that only Lenny McLean could. John couldn't help but laugh too, even though his body ached from the beating he'd taken. This was just another day in the life of a doorman, though. As John reflected on the fight later, he couldn't help but think about the aftermath of these kinds of brawls. People often talked about the violence and the adrenaline rush, but they rarely mentioned the toll it took on a person's body. The gouged eye, for example, John's right eye, had watered constantly for weeks afterward, and the pain sharp and relentless. The white of his eyeball had been lacerated, and he'd had to wear an eye patch for a while to protect it as it healed. Then there were the broken bones, the slashed skin, the stab wounds, the bruises that took weeks to fade. John had suffered a broken ankle, a slashed leg, a fractured cheekbone, and cracked ribs over the years. He'd been stabbed, punched, kicked, and battered more times than he could count. Every fight left its mark, both physically and mentally. The scars were badges of honor, sure, but they were also painful reminders of the brutality of the job. John wasn't the only one who bore these scars. Lenny McLean, for all his strength and ferocity, had his own collection of injuries. He'd been shot twice, one of the bullets lodged in his backside, a constant source of pain for the rest of his life. Matt Legg, another tough guy in their circle, had once had his jaw nearly ripped off in a brutal fight. In the world of bouncers and fighters, these injuries were par for the course. Things are a lot different now. These stories and the men involved were from a different, more lawless time. They sure don't make them like they used to. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.